pretending to be ashamed. She took a deep breath and then looked back up at Mena, her expression somber. I was upset, Mena. I can't lie. I I wanted that honor too. I wanted to be the one everyone cheered for, the one the prince admired. Mena reached out, placing a comforting hand on her friend's arm. Oh, Nami, I understand, but you're still my best friend. We've been together through everything, and I would never want this to come between us. Nami nodded slowly, forcing her face into a look of regret. She lowered her gaze, letting a silence settle between them before speaking again. I'm so sorry, Mena. I shouldn't have let my jealousy get in the way of our friendship. You deserve this honor. I was wrong. She paused, allowing her voice to falter slightly, pretending to struggle with the words. Can you forgive me? Mena's face softened with relief, and she pulled Nami into a warm embrace. Of course, Nami. You're like a sister to me. Nothing could ever change that. They held each other for a moment, and when they pulled apart, Nami offered Mena a small, tentative smile. She sensed that Mena had completely trusted her once more, and she knew it was time to set the final part of her plan in motion. Do you remember our secret spot near the forest? Nami asked, her voice filled with forced nostalgia. I was thinking about it recently. We used to go there after fetching water, just to talk about our dreams and laugh without anyone else around. Mena's eyes lit up, her face breaking into a smile. Oh yes, I've missed those days too. It's been so long since we went there. We should go back. Nami nodded eagerly, carefully hiding her true intentions. Yes, we should. It's been too long, and I'd love to catch up, just the two of us. It'll be like old times. Mena agreed without hesitation, excited to rekindle their friendship in the place that held so many memories. Little did she know that Nami's kind words and apparent reconciliation were nothing but a mask concealing her dark intentions. The next morning, the two friends met as planned, each carrying a pot to fetch water from the stream. They walked in companionable silence at first, with Mena occasionally pointing out familiar trees or flowers along the path. Nami, however, was focused, her mind racing with thoughts of her plan, rehearsing each step in her head to ensure she wouldn't falter. When they reached the secluded spot near the edge of the forest, Mena set down her pot and took a seat on the flat stone where they had spent countless hours talking and laughing as children. She sighed happily, gazing at the trees swaying gently in the breeze. Oh, Nami, it feels so good to be here with you, Mena said, her voice filled with genuine happiness. I missed this. Nami forced a smile, her grip tightening around her pot. She sat beside Mena, though her gaze was distant, a shadow of conflict momentarily passing over her face. Mena noticed her friend's silence and turned to her, concern flickering in her eyes. Nami, are you all right? You seem distracted, Mena asked, her voice soft. Oh, I'm fine, Nami replied quickly, shaking her head. Just thinking. Mena's brow furrowed. She reached out, resting a gentle hand on Nami's shoulder. You can tell me anything, you know. We're friends. Nami swallowed hard, struggling to keep her composure. She gave a slight nod, her gaze fixed on the ground. The more she tried to act naturally, the more her resentment seeped through her facade. Mena sensed her friend's discomfort, but before she could speak again, Nami abruptly stood up. Let's head to the stream, Nami said, her voice cold. We should fetch water and get back before it gets too late. Mena nodded, though a strange feeling crept over her. She picked up her pot and rose to follow Nami, but just as she turned to leave, she felt a sudden blinding pain at the back of her head. The world spun around her, and she dropped to her knees, clutching her head in confusion and shock. Stunned and disoriented, Mena tried to look up, but another heavy blow landed on her, and she collapsed to the ground. Her vision blurred, and the last thing she saw was Nami standing over her, her face twisted in anger and jealousy. Let's see if the prince still wants you now, Nami muttered under her breath, her voice dripping with bitterness. The forest grew silent as Nami fled, leaving Mena lying unconscious on the forest floor, her once bright future now shrouded in darkness. Hours passed, and Mena didn't return home. Her mother, who always waited for her daughter's cheerful return from the stream, began to worry. She paced around their small compound, glancing anxiously at the path that led to the stream, hoping to see Mena's familiar figure approaching, with her pot of water balanced gracefully on her head. As dusk began to settle over the village, her worry deepened, transforming into a creeping dread. Unable to wait any longer, she went to Nami's house, her heart pounding. Nami, sensing Mena's mother's worry, quickly put on a concerned face, even though her heart raced with anxiety for different reasons. "Nami," Mena's mother asked, her voice trembling slightly, "have you seen Mena? She hasn't come home, and I'm worried." Nami, her heart pounding in her chest, forced herself to stay calm. She shook her head slowly, pretending to think. "Auntie," she said, her voice low and sympathetic, "I remember seeing her at the stream, but I left earlier because my mother needed me at the farm." Mena's mother nodded, though the worry in her eyes deepened. She thanked Nami, then hurried off to gather the village elders and a few men to search the forest and stream area, hoping they would find her daughter. Nami watched them leave, her heart beating with a mix of fear and satisfaction, though she forced herself to keep her expression composed. The villagers combed through the surrounding areas, calling out Mena's name as they searched. Night had fully fallen, and their torches cast flickering shadows among the trees, adding an eerie feel to the forest. As they scoured every inch of the usual path, the quiet of the night grew oppressive. But there was no trace of Mena. When they returned empty-handed, Mena's mother fell to her knees, her cries piercing the stillness of the night. The entire village felt the weight of her sorrow, and whispers of the tragedy spread like wildfire. Nami watched from her window, her face pale as the reality of her actions settled heavily on her shoulders. She hadn't expected this level of upheaval. She'd only wanted Mena out of the way. Days passed, and Mena's disappearance became a somber mystery that everyone spoke of in hushed tones. Everywhere Nami went, people whispered, casting glances her way. She felt a growing weight in her chest, a gnawing guilt that haunted her every waking moment. Even her dreams offered no escape. She saw Mena's face every time she closed her eyes, smiling, unaware of the betrayal lurking in her best friend's heart. Nami's parents noticed her withdrawal, her quietness, and her reluctance to participate in daily activities. Her mother, noticing her daughter's troubled state, approached her one evening. "Nami," her mother asked gently, "you've seemed so distant. Is everything all right?" Nami forced a small smile, shrugging off the concern. I miss Mena, Mama. It's strange not having her around." Her mother nodded, her own face clouded with sadness. "Yes, it is. She was like a sister to you. I hope, wherever she is, that she finds peace." Those words twisted inside Nami's heart, leaving her feeling suffocated by the reminder of what she had done. She couldn't even look her parents in the eyes, and the villagers' ongoing searches only served to deepen her sense of guilt and fear. News of Mena's disappearance soon reached the palace, where the prince was devastated. He had looked forward to choosing her as his bride, captivated by her grace and talent. He hadn't even known her personally, but her dance had spoken to his heart, and her disappearance felt like a cruel twist of fate. The prince ordered his guards and several of his trusted advisors to assist in the search, determined to find her and uncover what had happened. As the days stretched into weeks with no sign of Mena, the prince's sorrow turned to frustration. He questioned the villagers himself, hoping someone might have seen or heard something. The entire village felt his sorrow, and the air was heavy with the mystery surrounding Mena's disappearance. Nami, on the other hand, continued to feel haunted. She thought her plan would bring her closer to the prince, that without Mena in the way, her path would be clear. But now, as she watched the prince's face shadowed with grief, she realized she'd only succeeded in creating a wound no one could heal. The prince had eyes for no one else, and her jealousy had led her into a trap of her own making. It was the very next evening after Mena's disappearance when Eze, a hunter from a neighboring village, ventured into the forest. He often crossed over to these parts for hunting, as the forest bordering Umu-Nze was rich with game. Eze, unaware of the commotion in Umu-Nze, moved quietly through the trees, his footsteps softened by the evening mist settling over the forest floor. As twilight fell, he noticed an unusual sight, a figure lying motionless near a cluster of trees. Curiosity and concern stirred within him. Eze cautiously approached, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of a young woman, her face pale, bruised, and smeared with dirt. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. Eze quickly realized that this was no ordinary accident. Her injuries suggested something more sinister, as if she had been struck down. Without hesitation, Eze gently gathered Mena into his arms, cradling her as he would a delicate bird. Her skin was cold and her pulse faint, but he was determined to help her. He carried her back to his hut in his village, speaking words of reassurance even though she lay unconscious. By the time he reached his hut, night had fallen, and he set to work, lighting a fire and preparing herbal poultices to tend to her wounds. Over the next few days, Eze nursed her with care, feeding her small sips of broth and keeping her warm. The hunter didn't know her name or her story, but he felt a deep compassion for her. He sensed she was fighting to survive, as if she had unfinished business in this world. On the third day, Mena finally stirred, her eyelids fluttering as she regained consciousness. Disoriented, she looked around, her eyes eventually settling on Eze's kind face. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You were hurt, but you're safe here." Mena tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back down. Eze steadied her, guiding her head back to the pile of clothes used as a pillow. She managed to nod in thanks, though her mind was foggy, fragments of the past few days jumbled and unclear. As her strength gradually returned, so did her memories, like pieces of a shattered vase being carefully placed back together. One evening, as Eze prepared some herbs for her, she spoke haltingly, her voice barely a whisper. "It was Nami," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief and sorrow. "My friend, she did this to me." Eze's face darkened with a mix of anger and sympathy. He understood the pain of betrayal and could sense the depth of her hurt. "Tell me everything," he encouraged gently. "You're safe now, but your story must be told." Mena took a deep breath, piecing together the memories of that fateful day. She described how they had gone to their quiet spot, how Nami's behavior had been off, and the way she had struck her without warning. Eze listened intently, his heart growing heavy with the weight of her sorrow. "We must return to your village," he said firmly, his gaze steady. "The people need to know what has happened, and your family needs to know you are safe." Mena nodded, determination shining through the pain in her eyes. She was grateful to Eze, this kind stranger who had rescued her from the forest and given her a chance to reclaim her life. Eze and Mena set out early one morning, making their way back to Umu-Nze. The journey was slow, as Mena was still weak, leaning on Eze for support. She felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. She had been gone for days, possibly even weeks, and feared what might have unfolded in her absence. She knew, however, that she needed to confront the truth of what had happened to her and expose the betrayal that had nearly cost her her life. When they finally reached the village boundary, the villagers' eyes widened in disbelief. Word spread quickly. Mena, the maiden who had mysteriously disappeared after the dance competition, had returned. Many people crowded around, some touching her shoulders and murmuring blessings, others gasping in shock. But as Mena and Eze pushed through the crowd, Mena's gaze remained steady, fixed on the path to the palace. Her mother was among those who came running, tears streaming down her face as she threw her arms around her daughter. "Mena, my child," she cried, pulling her close. "I thought I had lost you forever. How did you survive? Where have you been? Mena gently pulled away, glancing at Umu-Nze, who gave her an encouraging nod. She took a deep breath, preparing to recount the painful story. But before she could speak, the sound of royal drums filled the air, signaling the approach of the prince and the elders who had come out to see what the commotion was about. As the prince approached, his eyes met Mena's and a flash of relief and joy crossed his face. He had been deeply troubled by her disappearance, and his own investigation into the matter had turned up nothing. He addressed her gently, with a voice filled with both surprise and relief. Mena, we feared the worst. We thought you were lost to us. Mena nodded solemnly, her eyes meeting his. She glanced back at Umu-Nze, who gave her a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. My prince, Mena began, her voice trembling but resolute. I was betrayed by someone I trusted. Nami, my closest friend, was the one who tried to end my life. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Gasps of disbelief rippled through the gathered villagers. They exchanged bewildered glances, struggling to process the revelation. The prince's face hardened as he listened, his gaze shifting toward the direction of Nami's household. Umu-Nze then stepped forward, addressing the prince and the village elders. I found her, barely alive, lying in the forest beyond the village. It was only by chance that I came upon her. I nursed her back to health, and as she recovered, she told me her story. Murmurs broke out as villagers pieced together the implications of Umu-Nze's words. The betrayal of a friend was unfathomable, especially under such circumstances. The prince raised his hand, calling for silence. Bring Nami to the palace, he commanded, his voice low but filled with authority. The elders nodded, and a group of guards was dispatched to fetch Nami. Mena felt her mother's arm around her, offering strength and support, while Umu-Nze stood by her side, a steady presence in the face of the storm that was brewing. Not long after, Nami was escorted into the palace courtyard, looking pale and uneasy. She tried to appear calm, but there was a nervous energy in her movements, a slight tremble in her hands. She avoided Mena's gaze, but the weight of the accusations seemed to press upon her. The prince looked at Nami with cold fury, his usual warmth replaced by a stern expression. He addressed her directly. Nami, Mena has returned, and she has told us of your treachery. Do you deny her words? Nami hesitated, her eyes darting to Mena and then to the crowd. She opened her mouth to speak, but found herself at a loss for words. In the silence, the villagers began murmuring among themselves, the disbelief giving way to anger. Finally, Nami stammered out a response. Mena, I didn't mean for it to go that far, she whispered, but her voice faltered under the intensity of the prince's gaze. So you admit to it? He asked, his voice echoing in the tense silence. Nami lowered her head, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Her silence spoke volumes, and the villagers' murmur grew louder, fueled by a mixture of shock and outrage. Mena watched, her heart heavy, as the friend she had once loved stood before the crowd, exposed and vulnerable. You were my friend, Nami, Mena said softly, stepping forward. I would have shared any joy with you, but you chose envy and hatred. Nami looked up at Mena, her eyes filled with regret, but she could not bring herself to apologize. Perhaps her pride held her back, or perhaps she knew that no words would change what she had done. The prince turned to the elders and the villagers, his voice ringing with authority. For such a betrayal, there can be no forgiveness. Nami will be banished from Umu-Nze, never to return. Let her departure serve as a reminder that envy destroys even the deepest bonds of friendship. As the crowd parted, the village women began to sing a shameful song, a melody of sorrow and scorn, as they accompanied Nami to the edge of the village. Some spat on the ground as she passed, while others whispered curses, reminding her of the dishonor she had brought upon herself and her family. Mena watched as her former friend was led away, a mixture of sadness and relief in her heart. She knew that the memories of their friendship would always be tainted by betrayal, but she also understood that this moment was a necessary end to the dark chapter Nami had written. Nami was led out of the village, her head bowed in shame. The boundary of Umu-Nze was marked by a small stream, and as she crossed it, she paused, casting one last glance back at the village she had called home. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the lively chatter and laughter that usually filled the air. Once she was out of sight, the villagers turned back, their gazes filled with respect for Mena. The prince approached her, taking her hands in his voice soft but full of admiration. "Mena, you have shown resilience and grace. I am honored to have you as my bride." The crowd erupted in cheers, their joy renewed by Mena's resilience and the justice that had been served. Mena's mother wept tears of joy, her heart filled with pride and relief. And so Mena and the prince resumed the wedding plans. They were married in a celebration filled with joy and laughter, a stark contrast to the sorrow that had clouded the village in the days following her disappearance. They would go on to have a family, one that embodied the spirit of Umu-Nze, a testament to love, resilience, and the strength to overcome even the darkest betrayals. The moral of the story is simple yet powerful. True friendship should be rooted in joy for one another's success, not envy. Envy destroys the heart, poisons the mind, and, in the end, brings ruin to the envious. The end.